Okay, last night here on social justice, and at the end of this, I'm planning to tell you what I want to do next. I've been thinking about a couple routes to go, and I think I decided what we're going to do starting next week. So I'll talk about that at the end, so you got to stay all the way till the end. You can't leave early, okay? Yeah, no, you can't leave early. Okay, so up till this point, all these, I don't know what it's been, 9 or 10 weeks or something, we've been talking about social justice in the church, maybe more. It's been a lot of theory, some practicality, but a lot of theory, a lot of what it's all about and helping us understand it. So tonight is practical. We're trying to wrap it up. What are we supposed to do? How do we achieve racial reconciliation? And one of the questions, obviously, that we have in this is, do we actually need racial reconciliation? Do we actually need it? Now, how you answer that question is really based on how you define some things. Because we talked about how we are actually all relatives, right? So what are races? One of the common themes of critical race theory is that race is a social construct. In other words, we just made it up. And in a lot of ways, that's actually true. Because if you trace us all the way back to our ancestors, we are all related. And there's only one race, and it's the human race. So in that sense, we do just look at it. We say, okay, because you're a certain color, you're a race, and certain culture, you're a certain race. So we can kind of see that, except for critical race theory, when they say it's a social construct, they're thinking more that it's, we've made it up so some races or some colors can oppress others. So we don't buy into that definition of it. But really, what's a race? And if you think of it this way, think if we lined up the blackest person that we know on one side of the room or the world, whatever, and the whitest person we know on the other, and put every shade in between. At what point would we stop and say, this is black and this is white, or this is brown and this is black? At what point? Because you say, well, no, this one's so close to the next one, and this one's, it'd be real hard to make a dividing line. Okay, this one's black and this one's white, or this one's black and then brown and then white, or whatever. It'd be real hard to do that, right? Now, if you see a very white person, a very black person, it's kind of obvious. Or if you see a Hispanic and a black person, it's kind of obvious. But if you line them all up, where would you put the line between all the different shades? So if you look at it that way, it's kind of hard to say, where do the races start and end? And so therefore, the whole idea of having to reconcile races, why? Because we're really all humans. But we do have this issue in our society where people look down on other ethnic groups, often because of their colors, and so I think it is something we have to deal with. And if you haven't been sleeping like Rip Van Winkle through the last year, you know that there is racial tension out there. It shouldn't be, but it's there. And once people, say, okay, you're whiter than I am, or you're darker than I am, or whatever, then there gets to be this prejudice, and there gets to be this hatred and this animosity built up. And so because it's there, it's something we have to deal with. And so we have to know, what are we supposed to do? So many people say, well, let's fix this problem through critical race theory. And if you don't know what critical race theory is now, you've been sleeping or you haven't been here on Wednesday nights, because we've talked about it ad nauseum over and over and over again. And I hope that you've been able to see, if this was kind of new to you, whenever you see the news, read articles, that these things start to jump up and you really start to see these things we've been talking about, that I'm not making this stuff up. It is everywhere in society, and it doesn't take long to see it. Go probably just about any news site on the internet you go to, probably one of the front articles is going to have something to do with being woke, or something to do with critical race theory, or oppression of some kind. It's everywhere around us today. So we have to know. So how are we going to fix this? Do we fix it by critical race theory? No. Even though many people talk about critical race theory as an analytical tool, it's not an analytical tool. It is a worldview that is unbiblical. And so I think we need to scrap it and find out, how do we reconcile the races? Because there are problems. And without getting hung up on the definition of race and all that, there are things out there in the world where people aren't getting along with folks that aren't the same color that they are.
Pastor, it's not just race, though. It's cousins. What about the Palestinians and the Israelis? They're cousins.
Yeah, that they would kind of see that as a race thing too, in some ways. Well, kind of in some ways. I mean, it goes all the way, back to the Bible, obviously. Race, ethnicity, yeah, in fact, their brothers doesn't help a whole lot. Even though they would look a lot alike, that's an ethnicity. Maybe more of an ethnicity than a race might be a better way to put that.
Well, they hate each other.
Oh, yeah, definitely do. Definitely they do. We have prejudice. Prejudice, this is a term you hear a lot. I don't know if you hear it so much anymore today, though the idea is definitely out there. What is prejudice? If you think about the word prejudice actually is prejudging. Prejudging, prejudice. It's like you look at someone because of the color they are, you're judging what they're like. You're judging their character, and you're saying, oh, because you're white or you're black or you're Asian or you're Hispanic or whatever, because you look like that, therefore you are not worthy of something that I am worthy of. I'm prejudging you. I know nothing about your character. It's just that, because you're a certain color, certain race, as we might call it, you shouldn't get what I get. That's kind of, and obviously it's a bigger deal than that, but that's what prejudice is, prejudging, and it happens between every different color. And we're just talking about race here. It could be anything, but it happens, from blacks to white, from white to black, Asian to Hispanic, white, all everywhere, okay? It is, critical race theory, by the way, is an extremely racist ideology, and there's no way around it. So all these people that are getting woke and they're saying, oh, I realize my racism and I'm coming out of it. No, what they're doing is they are being even more racist because now they hate white people simply because of their color. That's what critical race theory is. And you can't fix one sin by getting into another one. If you find yourself hating someone because of their color, let's just say you're white and you hate someone because they're black, or you treat them badly because they're black, or whatever, you think badly of them because they're black, you don't fix the problem by deciding you hate white people. That's just another sin. No, you have to find out, how do you fix hatred? You're not supposed. As a matter of fact, on Sundays when we're getting into 1 John, John is going to keep coming up to the subject in his book about love. Love. And one of the things we're going to see over and over and over again in that book is if you don't love people, you have no business calling yourself a believer. If you don't love people. Now, the definition of love is something obviously we'll have to get into, because love does not mean acceptance. So if you hate someone because of their color, you can't call yourself a Christian. Because a mark of a Christian is love. Now, don't get me wrong, loving doesn't make you a Christian. That's not the point. But John's saying this is a mark of a believer. This is evidence of a believer. They love people because they understand what Jesus did for them. Okay, so you cannot. Now understand, that's kind of a blanket statement, okay? Because you've probably known Christians, well, they're prejudiced. Well, they got a problem, right? This is a relationship problem. But you can't have that as a mark of your life, being hateful of someone, and still be a Christian. It just doesn't work. Those things don't go together, as John says. So, all right, so let's just say we find ourselves having a problem with prejudice or with racism. And I'm not talking about you're a certain color, so therefore you're automatically racist. Okay, that's critical race theory. Throw that out the window. Let's just say that you individually, you find yourself seeing someone of another color, and there's something rises up in you, I don't like that person. Not because it's your neighbor and they're a jerk and they put their leaves in your yard, but simply because of their color. I don't like them because of their color. Okay, you should look at yourself and say, what is wrong with me? What do I have against this person just because of their color? Okay, so here's some steps, how to get rid of racial reconciliation. And I'm talking here on an individual level, not on if you're white or you're Asian or you're Hispanic or you're black. You need to repent of being your color. No, that's critical race theory. I'm saying, how do we get rid of this whole problem of people hating someone else because of their color? And so just going to give you several things here. 3 of them are internal. In other words, things I have to do to change myself. And then 2 are external. And that's the terminology I'm using anyway, of how to change things around us in society. The most important are the first 3, because you can't change society without changing yourself. Society only changes when individuals change. So if we find racism and prejudice in our lives, we need to start fixing us before our nation as a whole can be fixed. You know that all of the problems in our nation will be fixed if all the individuals in our nation would fix themselves. You know, how would our nation turn back godly again? Well, if all the individuals become godly again. It's really that simple, okay? So laws aren't going to do it. Laws are just not going to fix the problem. We tried that and it didn't fix the problem. Okay, so the first thing, how do we achieve racial reconciliation? Simply, number one, respond to the gospel. Respond to the gospel. If you're not a believer, I can preach till I'm blue in the face at you, and it's not going to make a difference probably. Because you're trying to change a heart when a heart's not going to change. Now, unbelievers, they can turn over a new leaf and they can do all those kind of things. But if you want lasting change, you've got to have a new heart. And that's what happens at the moment of belief, okay, of trust and salvation. God makes you a new person. And so you are a different person after that. And the church, once you become a believer and you're in the church, you realize that we are one. Matter of fact, I want you to open, if you will, in your Bible to Ephesians chapter 2. Now, before I read this, I just want to point out that this is not about racism as we know it, okay? So while I'm reading this, don't think, well, he doesn't understand the context. And this is about Jews and Gentiles. It's not about blacks and whites and Hispanic and all that, okay? That's not the point, but there's a lesson in here that we can get. Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 11, he says, "Now therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ." He's saying you used to have this Jew and Gentile division, and God has brought the Jews and Gentiles together. That's what the gospel is. It's for everyone. "For he himself is our peace," that's the peace between the Jews and the Gentiles, "who has made both one and has broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace, and that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity." So the whole idea with some fancy wording there is you had the Jews and the Gentiles, and there was a division there. How did the division of the Jews and the Gentiles come to be? This was a setup by God. God set it up. He chose the Jews. By the way, if you want any kind of difference, don't look at black and white and Hispanic and Asian. Look at Jews and Gentiles. Those are the two divisions that God sees. Because you had everybody, and he pulled the Jews out, separated the Jews from everybody else who are the Gentiles of every color, and he said, these are my special people. But then what he did in the gospel is he brought the Gentiles back in as far as his work for salvation goes. And then one day he'll pull the Jews out again and specifically work with them in the tribulation. But now they're all one together. He's broken down the wall of partition that separated the Jews and Gentiles, the division that he made himself, and he brought them back together in the gospel. Now, the reason I read this and point this out is not because we need to take that and say, okay, that he's talking about blacks and whites. He's not. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about Jews and Gentiles. But if there is a division that God actually made between the two ethnicities, and God brings them back together in the gospel, should we not also break down divisions between our own perceived ideas of differences between people and bring them together in the gospel? I mean, if God can bring the Gentiles into the gospel plan along with the Jews, why would we look down on someone of another color? When that's not a division God made. It's just they have, darker skin or lighter skin than we have. You see the point there? It's the gospel that unifies people together. And therefore, in the church, you shouldn't have racial irreconciliation anywhere, but especially in the church. I mean, when you come into the church, how sad would it be to not allow someone of a color in your church or to look down on them? Now, I don't know of any churches that are like that. I hope there aren't any decent churches that are like that, where someone could walk in and you'd be like, no, I'm sorry, this isn't for your color. Now, you're going to be more comfortable in churches generally of whatever color you are to a degree. We are obviously a predominantly white church. That's because we worship predominantly white. And there is a white worship, right? And there are churches that are predominantly black or African American. Why? Because they just worship a different way. And we're not going to say it's wrong. We're just going to say it's not my thing. Right? And they're going to come in here and going to say, you guys are boring. What's wrong with you guys, man? Put some swing into it, right? It's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the way that it is. Then Hispanics are going to come in here and say, where are your guitars and tambourines? Right? And you know, it's how it is. So it's just you gravitate to, hey, this is what I'm used to, this is what I like, and there's no problem with that. The problem is when you say, you're not welcome here. And when you say, or even when you think or you act in a certain way where someone's not equal to you, that should never be in the church. And obviously, you're going to gravitate toward people who tend to do things the way that you like, and I don't think there's any problem with that. Problem is when people are unequal or looked down on. Because we look back far enough, we all technically are of one race because we all have the same parents. Going back to Adam and Eve, or even more recently, going back to Noah and Mrs. Noah. We all have the same parents. We just, separate out and look a little bit different. So I mentioned Voddie Baucham in here before, and some of the things he says, I don't think that I actually have a quote here, but he basically said this, racial, he's a black guy, right? And he comes out strong against CRT. And he says basically that racial reconciliation is not something that we should strive for. Because some people are all about racial reconciliation, right? Let's bring it all together. Man, we should look at our society and we should say, I have no idea what the ethnic numbers are here in this area, between the different ethnicities. But let's just say that in this area, all these towns, let's just say it was 50% African American and 50% white. So there's many people say your church ought to be 50% African American, 50% white. I don't buy that. I don't think so, because you're kind of forcing something that doesn't need to be forced. Everyone should be welcome, excited for them to come, but they're just going to go where they're more comfortable with. That's the way I see it, without trying to push them into something. And so that's racial reconciliation a lot of times. Let's force us. Let's get into these numbers and let's just really focus on this. Voddie Baucham says racial reconciliation isn't something we should strive for. It's something that we have. If you are a Christian, you have racial reconciliation. If you cannot reconcile yourselves with people of other races, there's a pretty good chance you're not really a Christian because you don't understand forgiveness of God. You don't get it. All right, again, this is something that makes you saved. This is a mark of a believer. In the church, if there are people that are divided because of their races, you should look at that and say, can these really be Christians? I mean, can they really have been forgiven by God? Can they really understand what God has done for them and hate someone of another color? It doesn't mix, right? It just doesn't go. And so I think, I like that what he said. And again, this isn't a quote, this is the idea. Racial reconciliation isn't something we should strive for, it's something we have. If we don't have it, we need to find out why and fix it. It might be there is no salvation. Or it might be that we just hardened our hearts toward what God says, and we need to fix these problems. So I actually have that up there for you to write down. Racial reconciliation between believers is not something we achieve, it's something we have. It's not like, we're going to really strive for racial reconciliation. No, if you have multiple ethnicities or colors in your church, you have it. If there are people who don't like someone else because of their color, they got a problem, right? This is something we should just have as believers. It's just like we should say forgiveness for anything. If someone hurts you, there should be forgiveness there. It's just something that's part of being in the body of Christ. And matter of fact, oftentimes, I think I've said this before, but we talk about sin, and I preach about sin. Why do I have to preach about sin? I should never have to preach about sin. Because Christians shouldn't be sinning, right? It shouldn't be happening. Why do I have to stand up there and say, don't do this stuff? It's because there's a bunch of people either calling themselves Christians who aren't, or who are Christians that are getting so far away from God, it's ridiculous. We shouldn't have to talk about sin. Your connection group teacher shouldn't have to say, no, y'all know you're not supposed to be doing this stuff. We know. We know when things are wrong. We just shouldn't do it. We should never have to talk about sin. But we do because people sin, right? So we have to keep talking about it. And it's the same thing with this. We shouldn't have to talk about racial reconciliation in the church because it just shouldn't be there. If it is, there's a serious problem. And it's not that we need to start harping on racial reconciliation. We need to start harping on the condition of the heart because that's where the problem is. Fix your heart and a lot of the other stuff goes away. All your hatred and your unforgiveness and your racism and everything, all that goes away when your heart's right. So that's the main problem. Fix the heart, and then I have nothing left to preach on. And they don't have to come listen to me anymore. Just everybody stop sinning. We're all good, right? You're like, well, if it's that easy, I'm going to stop sinning, man. It's worth it, right? But we all know how it goes, right? You're a Christian. Yeah, still going to flow. But we need to be reminded of these things. That's why, oh, man, I've been doing that. It's sin. It's wrong. I'm going to stop doing that, right? That's why we keep preaching on it. Some people just don't listen. All right, number 2. How do we achieve racial reconciliation when we need it? Come on, wake up here. Oh, the thing's falling asleep on me here. I got to go this way. All right, pardon me for a minute. This thing is not...
I would just imagine how difficult all of this was in the early church, where you had not only Jews and Gentiles, but Jews and possible Romans. You know, which would have, you got some who own slaves, and some some that might have been slaves and had slave history in their family. Very, very wealthy, very, very poor. I mean, just a whole blend and mixture. And I just can imagine how difficult that must have been in the early church. And unity would have been a struggle.
Yeah.
In the first century.
I would imagine so. And even within Jesus' disciples, I mean, this wasn't a race thing, but you had the zealots. And, I don't know what happened to this thing. Okay, I think I'm seeing stuff here again. Just talk quietly amongst yourselves here. We'll get this.
Technology. Rub it against the wall. That always works.
Rub it against the wall. Yeah, this little thing here just died out on me. Okay, well, I'll tell you, see if I can get this thing going here. I'll give you what you need to fill out it's not too hard for us today. You just get that off there. Come on, go away. All right. Whatever. Where was I? Treat others as equals. I didn't give you that one. That's the one that bombed out on me. Treat others as equals, made in the image of God. That's what we are. Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So we're all equals, made in God's image. That's back to Adam and Eve. No colors there. They just were equal. Adam, Genesis 3:20, and Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. So every person is made in the image of God. When you hate someone based on their ethnicity, you're slapping God in the face. That's what you're doing. Because all of us are made in his image. So, questions that we should ask ourselves: do I have an attitude toward other people of their color? Do I harbor ill will towards someone because of their color? Do I speak derogatorily of someone because of their color? How do we treat people made in the image of God? Number three. This is one, actually I had 4. I said 3 at the beginning. There's 4 of them. Forgive when necessary. Forgive when necessary. I'm going to try to get that off there. Let me try this one more time because I want to especially show you the things on the end. Now, this is a subject that it seems like I talk about a lot. Passage that I love to use when I discuss this is 1 Corinthians 6:7. 1 Corinthians 6:7. Did I put that on your outline? I did. He says, "Now therefore it is utterly." Wow. I can't even read that. "Now therefore it is already an utter failure for you that you go to law against one another. Why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated?" In fact, I think that's one of the first sermons I even ever preached here. Maybe the first one. maybe when I was candidating, because I think this is so important. We as Christians sometimes can even find ourselves holding animosity toward other people. And he says, why don't you just accept wrong? Maybe someone has hurt you. Now, let's just look at this out from different angles, okay? One of the things you hear about a lot today is slavery. And we talked about that last week, slavery. Let's just say you're a person who your ancestors were enslaved by someone else. Let's just say you're an African-American person, your ancestors were enslaved by other people. How do you treat the people whose ancestors held your ancestors in slavery? I would think as believers that we would say, you know what? This wasn't even a personal hurt from you against me. This was ancestors against each other. But even if it was against me personally, I'm going to offer forgiveness. Why would we not forgive people? This is kind of a rhetorical question he asks. He says, why do you not rather accept wrong? Why do you not rather let yourselves be cheated? What is the answer to that? The answer, of course, is pride, because I don't want to forgive. Because I don't want somebody, because I want to hold it against you. Maybe you were a victim of a hate crime. I don't know if any of you ever were, but that's kind of the term that we have nowadays, right? If you do something to someone and they're of another ethnicity, we call it a hate crime, right? It doesn't matter what the purpose was, we call it a hate crime. Why not accept wrong? Let's just use this for example. Let's just say you went into a church that it was predominantly not of your particular color, not of your ethnicity. You went in there and they said, because you're of your color, I'm sorry, we don't allow you here. What would you do? Probably get on Facebook. No, not you. I'm talking about the you as in the people who aren't in this room, not you guys. Get on Facebook and start bad talking that church, right? I can't believe it, those wicked people, and I might use that as an example somewhere to show some things. But would I hold animosity toward them? I would hope not, because that's what Christians do. Christians forgive other people. That's the way it should be. So sometime we need to forgive. Maybe you grew up in an area, and in your area there was a certain ethnicity that was known as the hoodlums, the gangs, whatever. And because of that, you hold animosity toward them. What about people, and this is a hard one, what about people who served in a war? If you knew anyone who served in the Vietnam War, sometime those people have a hard time with the Vietnamese because they were trained to hate them, trained to kill. Or the Korean War or whatever. What about the Saudis, or maybe not the Saudis, Iraqis? What if you're in one of the Gulf Wars and you're trained to hate them? Now, there are Muslims, radical Muslims, who want to kill non-Muslims, right? And they're a big enemy of the United States of America. But should we hate them individually? No, of course not. Now we might, and that's a problem, but we shouldn't. Okay, number four, develop multi-ethnic relationships. Now, maybe it's easy, maybe it's not. Maybe you just don't have a lot of people around that are of another ethnicity, and that's fine. But if you have a problem with people of another ethnicity, try to make friends with some of them. And what it does is it humanizes them. You start to realize, wait a minute, they're not all bad. If you have a problem with Asians, let's say for some, that's kind of the big thing we're hearing is, there's a lot of, Asian hate crime, this kind of word you hear. Have a problem with Asians, well, go meet some of them, try to make some friends and realize that they're people just like you. They just look different, right? Maybe have different ways of doing things if they're from another country, whatever. And then you start to see them, rather than just as a group, you start to see them as individuals. We should deal with people on individual bases like that. So those are the internal ones, how to change ourselves. Let's look at external. I only have two of them for you. External ways, and these are the ways to help change society. First of all, I think it should be pretty clear, share the gospel with others. Because the way to change society is to change people's hearts. And again, we don't share the gospel so that we can change society. You do it so you can change your hearts and bring people to God. But only God can change their hearts. We can talk about racism all we want. We can talk about how bad it is. We can talk about what's wrong with critical race theory. We can do all that. We're not going to change people until their hearts change. And so we have to share the gospel with them. You don't fix racial tensions by repenting over being white. You don't change racial tensions by calling more attention to it, by jumping into something like critical race theory. Race isn't the focus. All this that's been going on in this last year in our nation with race isn't the problem. Racism isn't the problem. It's unchanged hearts that are the problem. That's why we have all of this stuff going all the way back to last Memorial Day and beyond that. But, Memorial Day, the George Floyd thing, that's, the thing that really was like the spark in the powder keg there, just really blew things up, even though there were a lot of other things. It's not racism. It's people's hearts haven't been changed, and people's hearts are full of animosity and hate, all different directions. And that's what the problem has been. And then the final one, the last one, is preach the truth of equality. When I say preach, I don't mean get behind a pulpit and preach. I mean just, talk about the truth of equality. But we have to talk about the difference, again, between equity and equality. Not saying preach equity. That's what we're preached about. That's what is being preached about today. Equity is the same results, right? Everybody has to have the same. You can't do that. It's not going to work. Equality is different. Equality is everybody is made in the image of God, and you don't refuse to let someone get ahead because of their ethnicity. That is a sin. Equality is, hey, we're all made in the image of God, not that we all should get the same results. That just can't happen. In our country in the last 150 or so years, we made a lot of progress in this area. Obviously, if you look back at slavery that was allowed, and you look at some of the laws that were in the United States, but then you look at things like the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which did a lot to get rid of slavery and things. We got rid of these laws, and that stuff had to be done. But any racism that exists out there today exists in the hearts of people. So obviously we need to approach them with the gospel. We need to preach the truth of equality, which is everyone is made in the image of God. And therefore, one thing we should never do is what is called racial slurs. That's kind of a term you hear a lot today, right? Racial slurs. Everything is a racial slur. You got to be careful what you say because you don't want to accidentally slur somebody. If we know something is going to offend somebody, if a term is used derogatorily toward another ethnicity, we just shouldn't use it. Now, don't take that and put it over in the gender debate about personal pronouns. I'm not talking about the same thing. I don't think let's just leave that for another day. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that you might say if someone of another color would be offended by that. Just probably shouldn't say it. Well, I've always said it. Well, don't be a jerk. How about forgiveness? How about showing love that we're supposed to be showing, okay? Because we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all made in His image. So that wraps all that up. Comments or questions, and I'm going to tell you about what we're planning to do next time around. Anything you want to add to this, to the whole thing? The whole thing.